we are back with another Nancy Drew no spoiler reviews, and today we are going to be covering 3 more books in the Nancy Drew series. So we are going to be covering books number 66, 67, and 68. So for the first book, we have number 66. This one is called Race Against Time, and this one was published in 1982. So the synopsis for this story reads, when a valuable racehorse named Shooting Star is stolen from Rainbow Ranch, Nancy becomes embroiled in a feud between 2 ornery men. Accusations fly as Nancy is asked to find the missing horse and the thief. At the same time, the young detective's friend, Ned Nickerson, and his newly formed college film club have asked Nancy to star in a movie. But the abandoned Victorian mansion in the woods chosen as the film's setting seems to invite disaster. No sooner do the movie makers start work than the estate's stable mysteriously burns down. As other attempts are made to harass the group, Nancy's investigation becomes more and more perilous. Will she be able to follow the surprising clues to conclude her intriguing search? Alright guys, so as far as my bingo card goes, I actually did not bingo this time. I got really close. I needed, let's see, there were 2 ones that I needed 1 more space and I would have gotten it on this card, so very close miss on that one. If you would like to play along with the Nancy Drew bingo cards, I do have them in my Etsy shop for a digital download. You can get 32 unique Nancy Drew bingo cards you can print off at home and play along as you read. Take it from me, it's definitely a lot of fun and it keeps me more engaged in the stories. And once again, you guys know we do like to track the orphans in the stories, so I will put the previous orphan count right here. So we actually don't have any orphans for this story, so nothing to add for now. So for this story, I actually read this one a couple weeks ago and I have to say, I kind of don't remember a lot of this story. I wrote down my notes, thank goodness, so let me pull those up and go along with them, because it's definitely been a few weeks and this one just didn't stick out in my mind that much. Like certain aspects of it and like scenes of the story did, but like the story as a whole just kind of didn't really, like, I don't know, it just didn't stick out to me. So the first thing I have in the notes is that they explicitly state that Emerson College is in another state, so River Heights and Emerson are not supposed to be in the same state according to this story. That definitely contradicts a lot of other things that we have read before, but I always imagined that Emerson wasn't in the same state as River Heights, but they're saying so now in this one specifically. And we also know that this story takes place in the summertime because Ned is taking a summer course at another college near River Heights. And then a little bit later through the book, we actually learned that the story takes place sometime after July 4th because that is like a notable date in this mystery. So the book says sometime around mid-July is when the story is supposed to be taking place. We do once again get another mention of Nancy performing with the Footlighters, and this is the second callback they have done to that specific theater group that Nancy has worked with before in the past in the Clue of the Dancing Puppet, and then they also referenced it in one of the last few books that we read, so they're once again referencing it again. I always love when they reference back to some of like the stories. I just find like even those little details, just for me, I love when they do that. So in the story, it's starting out Nancy, Bess, and George are going to this abandoned Victorian mansion in the woods that the film class has actually decided they want to use as the set for their student movie that they are entering into a contest. And so Ned is kind of heading up the film class and he is serving as like the writer and the director for this little student film. And it's kind of funny because the student film is actually like a vampire comedy kind of situation, which I thought was very funny. But of course, right away things start to get a little mysterious like we learned in the synopsis. So that's kind of like the first set of mystery that is kind of going on in this story. We also have a lot of like little minor characters that are part of like the film crew and the film club, and one of the little funny things that I mentioned was that there is a character named Sarah and there's another character named Gwen, and she's kind of like the bratty character and she kind of does some really mean things to Nancy, but we kind of get a lot of like the snide remarks coming through Sarah rather than Nancy's. So I thought it was kind of funny how like Sarah is almost saying like what we want Nancy to say to like tell off this other girl, but of course Nancy is too too, I don't know, she's too polite to do that. So we kind of get like what we want Nancy to say through Sarah, which I just thought was kind of funny because then it keeps Nancy like looking all pure and innocent, but then we still get to hear Sarah like really give it to Gwen. So I thought that was kind of funny how they're kind of like sidestepping all of this and not really like making Nancy stand up for herself. Oh, and another thing I put in my notes, that the whole filmmaking kind of thing really reminded me a lot of like Dawson's Creek whenever he would do his little student films, you know, the really low budget kind of things that are really funny. So that was totally the vibes it was giving me as I was reading this when they were talking about all of the like filming the scenes and everything like that. Totally got Dawson's Creek vibes. And then of course, like more of the A plot mystery we have in this story is that there is a racehorse that has gone missing and Nancy is trying to find it. And something that we don't get too often in the Nancy Drew books is we kind of have like several suspects that all have like a motive for why they would have maybe committed the crime, but we don't know like who actually did it or who's working with who and things like that. So I do kind of like when we have more of like a whodunit kind of style rather than the ever typical here's the villain from the very beginning and then we're just chasing him the whole time. So I much rather prefer when there is a little bit more thought put into having several suspects and motives as to why they might have done it or not have done it. So I definitely found that that was one thing I really enjoyed about this mystery. And I think it goes without saying this is definitely like a very like horse theme, equestrian themed kind of heavy mystery. So if you're really into horses or anything like that, this is definitely one that will probably pique your interest. But we have once again, anytime there's like horses in the Nancy Drew mysteries, there's always the scene where Nancy like gets bucked off a horse. And this is like the third or fourth time they have done that, and every time it has been like the same exact reason. And I just feel like, come on, let's quit reusing that plot line so many times. But I feel like anytime there is a horse story, you can bet that Nancy's gonna get knocked off a horse. Oh, I also found it funny that there is like one of the firemen named Bert, and I thought it was so funny that they named one of the side characters that when one of the main 6 characters is also named Bert, but his name is Bert, but it's spelled B-E-R-T, which is also George's boyfriend's name, but his is Bert spelled B-U-R-T. But Bert really isn't even in the story at all. Like Bert Edelton and Dave Evans, those are like Bess and George's boyfriends. They don't really make an appearance at all in this mystery, I don't think. Like I said, it's been a couple weeks, but I'm pretty sure they didn't make an appearance at all. I don't know why they do things like that, but they do it kind of often. We also have another character repeat name. This time it is a character named Cliff. Now, if you don't remember, the last time we had a character named Cliff was in The Swami's Ring. Now, technically that character's real name wasn't Cliff. That was more of like a nickname, but I thought it was funny that they actually decided to use that name again, especially since that really wasn't that many books ago. They're already reusing another character name. We also have a really cool instance in the story that once again we do not see too often, and I don't want to like spoil it or give it away, but I will say that it does involve like a pretty intricate booby trap that is set that I feel like was actually kind of really interesting to like read, and I wish they would do that more in the Nancy Drew series. It's actually like a pretty clever idea, so I liked the whole booby trap situation, if you know this one. We also had a ton of red herrings in this story, which again, we don't see too often in Nancy Drew series. They tend to be a little bit more straightforward on like who the villains are, but this one, I liked that there were a lot of kind of like plot lines that would lead you down a road to suspect that it was a particular person, but then you'd get some conflicting information that would make you think, okay, maybe it's not them. That's the kind of stuff I really love, and I wish they would put in the Nancy Drew books more. So that was actually something that I really did like them, but there's definitely a lot of red herrings in the story. However, I do feel like there was one particular red herring in the story that they kept kind of bringing up again and giving you reason to believe it is the specific person, and all the way to the very end they bring that person up again and mention seeing someone at a specific place that would kind of lead you to believe something, but then it turns out that that person is not who is the true villain. So I kind of felt like sometimes they would take the red herring too far and then it would never come back to anything. So that was one thing I put in my notes, that they really pushed heavy on someone and then all the way up to the end, and then it really didn't pan out to anything at all. Another thing I put is there really isn't that many appearances of Bess and George. Like, we do see them like a little bit in the beginning and maybe like a couple interactions throughout the book and then maybe just a little bit at the end. But in this story, really, I feel like Nancy is really on her own for most of the mystery. And not only is she working on starring in Ned's college film, but also she's trying to solve the mystery of the missing valuable racehorse, and all at the same time she's also modeling for a series of commercials all through the mystery. So she's definitely staying pretty busy, and I feel like she just doesn't have a lot of backup help in this mystery as much as you would think, especially with Bess and George like being in the story but just not being that present. And then of course Ned is so busy like with his film class, he's not really that much of a help either. And there's kind of like a whole little like almost a C plot as far as like the whole movie goes. This one overall, I did like this book. I think I would rank it 3 stars. That is kind of like my baseline. Like, I didn't love it, I didn't hate it. I did like a lot of like the scenes where they're like actually filming like for the student film. I thought it was kind of fun and interesting. And like I said, I did like that there was kind of like several people that could have been part of it. Overall in the end though, I do think that a lot of like the villains were pretty obvious, even with them throwing in a lot of the red herring details. I still think it's pretty obvious who the villains are and their motivation for it. But overall I did enjoy the story. It just wasn't one of my favorites, wasn't the most memorable one for me. But once again, if you're like really into horses or like the theming of horse or equestrian kind of things, I think that you'll really enjoy this mystery. So now we're going to be moving on to book number 67. This one is called The Sinister Omen, and this one was published in 1982. So the synopsis for this one reads, when Nancy and her friends head for spring vacation in Fort Lauderdale, they are in for more than just a sunburn. Before she even has a chance to have some fun in the sun, Nancy is asked to help a wealthy elderly woman. Burglars keep breaking into her home, but they never steal anything. Nancy has to figure out what they are looking for before someone gets seriously hurt. Her father also has a tough case on his hands, and Nancy would love to help him solve it. A gang of forgers and smugglers are counterfeiting valuable stamps. Nancy received several warnings from the group that prove that they are somewhere in South Florida. This gang won't let anyone stop them from completing their pirating plans. Battling 2 tough mysteries, Nancy persists in her search for a solution and a vacation in the fun-filled atmosphere of sunny Fort Lauderdale. Alright guys, so for my bingo card for this one, it was another near miss. I needed just one more to get a diagonal bingo, and I needed international mystery. Unfortunately, this one is not an international mystery, but another one I was so close to bingoing. And as far as the orphans go, we do not have an orphan in this mystery. So I finished this one just a couple nights ago, and I have to say this was one of those ones I like picked it up and I read a whole bunch of it in the beginning, and then I like left it for several days and didn't come back to it, and I was just kind of like, oh, I don't really want to pick it back up again. But I finally got through this one and finished it the other night. I didn't take the best notes on this one, so bear with me as I refresh my memory. So the first note that I had from this one, we actually learned that the boyfriends, Ned, Bert, and Dave, they actually state that they are seniors now at Emerson College. I don't think that they have ever called them seniors before specifically. If they did, I am just missing it or don't remember, but I feel like this is the first time they actually say that they're seniors. So that was one little tidbit of info that we learned from this one. And the story starts out, Nancy, Bess, and George are all staying over at Bess's house. They are staying over because they want to get an early start on their long drive to Fort Lauderdale. Now this story had me all in a tizzy as far as where River Heights is supposed to be located based on some of the details that they mention in the story. So let me just get into that, because you guys know I'm always into tracking, like trying to figure out where exactly River Heights is supposed to be. And I think we'll never truly find out because it moves around so much depending on the story. This one definitely kind of threw me for a loop. So long story short, in the beginning, the boys kind of come over really early in the morning to tease the girls that they're gonna beat them to Fort Lauderdale before the girls get there, but the boys are driving and they don't realize that the girls actually have a secret plan of how they are getting to Fort Lauderdale. So the boys are kind of teasing them that they're gonna get there first, and the girls are like, yeah, go ahead. They don't happen to know that Nancy is actually going to be flying a plane with Bess and George to Fort Lauderdale to beat the guys there by like a day and a half. So you'll learn that in in like the first 3 pages, so don't worry, that's really not a spoiler. I did think it was a little interesting though how they kind of like do a callback to the Sky Phantom, since Nancy is piloting a plane to Fort Lauderdale, and we do have some mischief that happens with that, but I won't spoil any of that. But I do think it's a little out of the ordinary just for one of your girlfriends to casually like pilot you guys to Florida for vacation. Just seemed a little bit ostentatious in my opinion. But back to the whole situation of like, where is River Heights? So the boys are mentioning that they're going to be south of Washington DC before the girls even get started on getting to Florida, because they think that they're also driving and they're just gonna beat them. So I put, it seems more like the location would be pointing towards New Jersey rather than like the Midwest, kind of like Ohio or Illinois kind of area. So I put another point for possibly New Jersey being River Heights. So I looked up like some routes on the map, like if you were driving from Chicago to Fort Lauderdale, you wouldn't even be going anywhere through Washington DC. Same thing if you were somewhere in Ohio going to Fort Lauderdale, you would also not be going through Washington DC. So I kind of like did a route from like northern New Jersey down to Fort Lauderdale, and that does cross through Washington DC. So I'm gonna have to give that one to a point for a vaguely New Jersey, vaguely upstate New York maybe, who knows. So the other thing that really confused me, we get a little bit more information on Nancy's kind of like path of flight, because it says that they fly down the eastern seaboard, passing New York City and continuing along the New Jersey coastline past Atlantic City and down along the Cape of May. So then that kind of threw my New Jersey plan out of the way, because if they're flying from River Heights and they're flying south and passing New York and New Jersey, they have to be somewhere farther north than New York and New Jersey. So that one really kind of like threw me for a loop. Then they say they head down towards Norfolk, Virginia. They also mention that they pass Cape Hatteras. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. Then they get down to the coast of South Carolina, and that's where they kind of have some issues, some trouble that I won't spoil, but that gives us a pretty clear path of where they're flying and where they're coming from. So really, River Heights, where the hell is River Heights? Somewhere north of New York City now, according to this mystery. Oh, and then going back to another thing that confused me on the location of River Heights. Guys are driving, but they also run into some problems trying to get to Fort Lauderdale, and one of the things they mention is that they finally made it to central New Jersey and they have an issue with the car. Now there are a few plot lines in between the girls leaving River Heights, flying to Fort Lauderdale, and before they get to Fort Lauderdale, so I don't want to spoil any of that, so I'll just kind of leave that where it is. So one thing I thought was kind of weird is like how we always have like the A plot, B plot mysteries and they all tie together. Again, somehow for this one, the first mystery is introduced as one of Carson Drew's cases, which he is, he has a client in Fort Lauderdale, a very rich man, and they are on the case of some stamp forgers. So that's kind of like the A plot. But then the B plot comes in with basically just a random woman coming up to Nancy at the airport, and she's like, hey, are you Nancy Drew? I got a mystery for you. And so of course Nancy, being Nancy, cannot say no, and so the whole B plot is about the elderly woman who has burglars breaking into her home, but they don't take anything, and so she was trying to get her to figure out what is going on. But there is some plot lines once we actually get to Fort Lauderdale that I just feel like were very inconsistent with a lot of Nancy Drew books. One of them specifically, they get to Carson Drew's client's home. He's a very wealthy man. He has housekeepers and things like that in Fort Lauderdale, and they mention that some of the housekeepers speak Spanish, and then there's a continuity error that Nancy says she does not understand the housekeeper speaking Spanish, and it says that she has a rudimentary level of Spanish, which is very conflicting with several Nancy Drew books. I mean, hell, she goes to like Mexico City in the Triple Hoax and she has no problem communicating with anybody, and in the stories they even mention at how she can speak Spanish because she has gone to Mexico so many times. Even in the Forgotten City, there is a scene where Nancy's speaking Spanish to people and communicating with them. So I just find it very funny that like Nancy randomly can speak languages and randomly she can't, and it just kind of goes back and forth on like whatever helps the plot for the story in this particular book. So I thought that was kind of strange that they keep like kind of like giving her superpowers and taking them away at some points. So we have another case of like really early on, there is like this big kind of rescue mission going on for Nancy, and she's kind of doing it solo, and it's kind of one of those things where it's like, okay, Nancy, this is something that like the cops would typically take care of, and you have just somehow outsmarted an entire police force that they couldn't figure out. And she has the slimmest hint that you could ever imagine, that she's just like, oh, well, I think I should go to this random location in the middle of nowhere, and of course she happens to be right. I just find that there's a lot of really big leaps in logic in this mystery. I do have to say it does take quite a while for the two like seemingly separate mysteries to kind of intertwine. And I do have to say, like, I feel like for most of the part with Carson's case of the mystery, we spend a lot of time working on that one, but I feel like we don't ever really learn a whole lot other than they just pretty much give us a big info dump. So kind of on that side, they kind of already know who is behind the whole thing, which, you know, is a big pet peeve of mine. I hate when they're just like, well, we think it's this guy, and let's just, you know, chase after them the whole mystery, which is kind of what happens here. We do have a lot of kind of flipping back and forth from like the middle of the book between the next two mysteries, because Nancy then kind of shifts her focus towards the B plot, which is the elderly woman who has burglars breaking into her home and she doesn't know why. I do really like that character, her name is Mrs. Palmer. She is a very almost kind of like a curmudgeon-y old woman, but she's also kind of friendly, but she kind of has like this little bit of a strict side to her. So she really kind of gives Nancy a run for her money as far as Nancy taking her on as a client. But I did find her to be a very funny character, and one that really stood out, because sometimes a lot of characters in the Nancy Drew mysteries are kind of flat. They don't have a lot of personality, but I have found from the last several books, whether they were either villains or even just characters or clients or anything like that, there's definitely been a lot more interesting personalities coming through on some of like the non-main cast characters. So I have actually quite been enjoying that, and it really made the second half of the book a little bit more interesting for me, having those kind of personalities. So once Nancy kind of like ties the two mysteries together and she understands why the burglaries are happening and what they are looking for, we of course have the big end scene chase of the villains and the takedown and everything like that. I found that it was kind of like a little humorous at the way that some of the characters were kind of baiting Nancy along the way. There's a specific character that we meet near the end who just really kind of comes out of nowhere, who happens to really give Nancy like kind of the smoking gun evidence for no reason. And I just find that like it kind of came from like that character's like hubris almost. Like, why would you just invite the detective over to letting them just snoop around to solve the mystery? I think it was kind of like a little bit of too much of a, now why would they do that? And once again, we have another one of those situations where we have like this randomly large group of villains that all come out of nowhere and are all interconnected. I counted, there were, I think, 13 different people working together in this mystery, and some of them had such a small part. I'm like, why did they even bother like having a whole other character who has to carry out this specific task? Like 13 villains, you guys, that is ridiculous. So overall, I'm not gonna lie, because I didn't like read this book all the way through. I think if I had like read it in one sitting or something, I'd obviously have like a more put together like timeline of the whole story. But I really feel like these two mysteries weren't that interconnected that much in the mystery, unless I just like totally missed a whole bunch of things. But I feel like I just didn't really jive with this story a whole lot. Not to mention, I don't know why I didn't even mention this in the first place, this is like the 4th time Nancy has gone to Florida. Can we please stop going to Florida? She has been to Florida more than any state in the entire United States, or any locations in any of the books. Of course, aside from like the quick little trips to New York and everything, Florida is the most visited state that Nancy has gone to. Can we like spread the love out a little bit? I have also said this before, I really wish that Nancy would have gone to like all 50 states and like have done a mystery in there, but unfortunately that's not the case. So I was very let down that there's not a Nancy Drew mystery in my state, which is so sad, especially when she went to Florida 4 times. Like, come on, we don't have to go to Florida that many times. Honestly, you guys, I just feel like I don't have my thoughts put together enough to really give you like a full detailed kind of review on this one. I thought it was an okay book and I liked bits and parts of it, but I just feel like for me the mystery didn't like come together very well in my mind, and that's just a me problem. I'm sure there's probably people that really enjoyed this one. Oh, and one thing I forgot to mention, like the title of this one, it's called The Sinister Omen, and I feel like that title just, it fits, I guess, the book, but I just feel like it doesn't feel like a very Nancy Drew title, and I feel like that for the last several books they've kind of been having a little bit more vague titles that I feel like just don't fit the mysteries very well. And so this one I also felt like that, The Sinister Omen, it definitely like has a reoccurring theme throughout the mystery as far as like why and what the Sinister Omen is, but I just didn't really care for, I don't know, I just didn't connect with the title and the story very much. So for me, I ranked this one 2 stars. I don't know, I just didn't love this story. So unfortunately I don't have that much more to say about this one. Like I said, the plot lines of it all and like everything is just not that clear in my mind. And another thing I always like to do is after I finish a Nancy Drew book, I like to go into Goodreads and I like to read other people's reviews and see like, did other people have the same feelings and thoughts? Like, is there something I missed, or are there good points that they brought up that I didn't think about? And I have to say that like a lot of the reviews for like some of the last few Nancy Drew books have been pretty bare on Goodreads. Like there just hasn't been that many good reviews on there, or like good thought-provoking reviews, and so that's another thing where I'm just like kind of getting at this like little stale midpoint of the series a little bit. So this one just wasn't my favorite book. Like I said, give it 2 stars. So yeah, those are my thoughts on book number 67, The Sinister Omen. So we'll go ahead and move on to the next book. And finally, for the last book for this video, we are going to be doing number 68, and this one is called The Elusive Heiress. And this book was published in 1982. So the synopsis for this one reads, 40 years ago, the daughter of millionaire Arlo Winthrop ran away from home to marry a man her family did not approve of. Now her ailing father wants to make peace with his daughter, but first Nancy has to find her. The only clue leads to Cheyenne, Wyoming. On the plane there, Nancy and her boyfriend Ned meet 10-year-old Jennifer Buckman. Jennifer's mother was supposed to meet her daughter at the airport, but she never showed up. Now Nancy has 2 missing people to find. As Cheyenne celebrates its heritage with frontier days and a rodeo, all the dangers of the Old West, from a runaway stagecoach to a bucking bull on the loose, threaten to keep Nancy from solving the mysteries. So as far as my bingo cards goes, it was another near miss. I just needed one more. No, actually there were 2 ways that I needed 2 different ones to get bingos on this one. So very, very close. Ugh, I hate whenever I get that close and then I'm just missing one, but that was once again the case for this. And in this mystery, we actually do have one partial orphan. I won't spoil who, but we will add one to the counter for this one. Alright, so my notes on this book, I read this one pretty quickly. I think I read like the first like 5 chapters in one night, so I was already a quarter of the way through the book when I first started reading this one, and then I did have to put it down for a couple days, but I did finish it up rather quickly. So for this one, I actually really did enjoy a lot of the mystery for this one because I didn't have as much of like a disjointed like kind of reading process with this one. There are times where I just like pick up a book, read like 2 pages, and then I have to put it down, and I hate whenever that happens. So anytime that I can like read it more all the way through, I definitely feel like I always enjoy those a little bit more, and the mystery as far as like the storyline goes definitely stays a little bit more intact for me. So that was definitely one thing that really had it going for it for this book, was that I was actually able to read it in a rather sequential order, and not as much of the details got kind of lost in everything because I had to keep picking it up and putting it down like sometimes I do. So like the synopsis mentioned in this mystery, Nancy is contacted by a local millionaire who is looking for his daughter. He is in poor health and he wants to rekindle his relationship with his daughter because now he thinks he's going to pass soon. But like the synopsis said, she has moved away 40 years ago after her family didn't approve of the man she wanted to marry, and now Nancy has to find the missing elusive heiress. So early on, there is a mention of Nancy's mother, which we don't get very often. Very few times do we actually get something mentioned about Nancy's mother other than the fact that she passed away when Nancy was 3 years old. So this one, there's just a little tidbit that Nancy's mother had a friend named Grace Reed who happens to live out in Cheyenne, Wyoming. So she kind of serves as like Nancy's touch point over out there in Wyoming, and that is who she stays with for the majority of the mystery. We also get a little hint that it is supposed to be taking place in like the summertime, because while Nancy and Ned are flying to Cheyenne, Nancy kind of ends up wrapped up into another mystery as always, and there's a woman at the airport who asks Nancy to help kind of chaperone this young girl who is flying on her own to Cheyenne to meet her mother. So Nancy agrees to keep an eye on her and help her out. However, when they get to the airport, the mother is nowhere to be found, and Nancy feels responsible for this girl. So this is kind of where the second part of the mystery all kind of comes together, and Nancy is trying to track down this girl's mother. So we know that it is summertime because the little girl Jennifer mentions that she is leaving boarding school and that there's usually not many other girls around in the summertime at the boarding school. And then just a little bit later we learn that that is actually supposed to be taking place in July. Once again, we have another like minor character name reused, and this time we have a police officer and his name is Dave Hill. And you guys know that one of the boyfriends of Bess is named Dave. So I just always find it funny, like of all the names in the world, you're just gonna reuse like the most common name that is already a name of one of like the main 6 characters. However, we do not have any appearance of Dave or Bert in this mystery, and we really don't have much of an appearance from Bess or George either. They're very, very minor characters in this mystery. It's definitely a Nancy Ned kind of heavy mystery. We also get another clue at the location of where River Heights is supposed to be. Once again, Nancy makes a mention that Cheyenne, which is in Wyoming, is 2 hours behind River Heights, which would put River Heights in the Eastern time zone. So once again, East Coast is where River Heights is supposed to be taking place in this mystery. Now, I do have to say this is probably one of the Nancy Drew books that, like, from the synopsis on its own was probably one of the clearest cut. I can see exactly how this mystery is going to go, and I have to say that I really wasn't surprised at all when you kind of get to like all the mysteries and how they tie together and what plays parts in other mysteries and things like that. And I feel like I was able to like really call this mystery from the literal beginning. Like, I read the synopsis for the first time and I said, I bet that this is what the situation is going to be. And I was right. And another thing I've noticed that they've done in the last couple Nancy Drew books, especially in like the Venice one, Mystery of the Winged Lion, you know, if you read the mystery and then you go back and read like one of the first few kind of like comments or kind of your first few pages, there's like little Easter eggs that you might not catch the first time you read the book until you've finished it and come back and read it again. Then you're kind of like, oh, there was a little Easter egg right there that I didn't catch. And they definitely did the same thing in this book, but whenever I came to that Easter egg early on, I noticed it right away and I'm like, this is exactly what they're doing right here. This little comment, this little remark is going to tie into the story, and it absolutely did. And I did really like this book though, but I just felt like it was a little bit too of an easy to predict kind of mystery. And the other thing is I feel like a lot of this book takes place in Cheyenne, and like it said, they're celebrating the frontier days, and so they're going to a lot of parades and a lot of rodeos and a lot of things like that. And I feel like a lot of the book was really heavy on kind of like all the carnivals they go to and all of that stuff. And I feel like even though there are like some mysteries and clues that she picks up along the way, I do feel like really a lot of the book was very heavy on kind of like all the celebrations that they're going to, and not necessarily that much of like strict like mystery solving, I guess is the best I can describe it. And in my notes I actually put no mention of Bess, George, Bert, or Dave. So I thought maybe like she mentioned them like once or twice in the beginning, but I think in my notes apparently I don't think they're mentioned at all, if I am remembering that correctly, which is always kind of weird whenever like there's no mention of Bess and George. So in my notes I put so predictable, I literally called it from reading the synopsis alone. Every clue I was able to figure out right before it was revealed, and it was a pretty straightforward mystery and easy to understand the motives. but I did still really enjoy the mystery. There's also one little scene in here that I had not really anticipated in the story though, but this is technically an international mystery, and I was really kind of like surprised by that because they kind of like teased this location very early on, and I thought, well, maybe we won't actually go there, maybe it won't actually really tie into the story much other than just like kind of in passing, but it actually does come into play. So technically this is an international Nancy Drew book, which definitely really surprised me. That was probably the only surprise in the story that I had, was that this is technically an international one. So I'm definitely gonna have to put this one on the map, but I won't spoil where or anything like that. The only thing that I didn't like about that was that I felt like the international part of it really only lasted like 2 seconds as far as the story goes, and I feel like it didn't really add much to the story, so it kind of was a weird international trip that was like kind of thrown in there that I kind of felt like didn't necessarily have to be there in the end. I also put, God, how many aliases does this one person have to have? And to not spoil it, I won't say anything, but there is a person who has like up to 4 aliases, and I'm like, oh my gosh, was that really necessary? So even though I did have like a few kind of like, I don't know, not complaints about this book, but just like some nitpicky points, I will say I did still really enjoy this book, and I would rank this one 4 stars. There's something about like the westerny kind of themes in the Nancy Drew books that I actually really do kind of enjoy, which I wouldn't typically think, but this one was really fun. Even though it was a little lighter on like the mystery side, it was definitely still very like fun, and like festivals and rodeos and carnivals and parades and things like that. So if you think that you would really enjoy that kind of story as far as like the theming goes and like westerns and stuff, I think that you would really enjoy this mystery. Alright guys, so that is it for all of my thoughts on these last 3 books in this series. I am really surprised that I have actually been able to kind of keep up with my schedule a little bit better right now, which I wouldn't have expected because this is really like my busy time at work right now. So I am just trying to do my absolute best to stay on top of my schedule and not get far behind on it. Reading the books like as much through as I can in one sitting is definitely a lot more enjoyable for me as far as like understanding the stories and the plot lines and not forgetting the details that kind of pull everything together. So I'm definitely trying to do a really good effort at staying on top of that schedule. So I really hope that you guys have been enjoying these videos as well, and that is pretty much it for this video. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and subscribe. You can follow me on social media. Links are below, and until my next video, I will talk to you guys later. Bye.